wearing this one all fancy, and I'm so worried I'm going to have a live wardrobe malfunction.
You'll be
Oh,
good.
welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Inner Tapestry Series. I am, as always, delighted to be here with my dear friend, Red MoonEagle. Red, if you would go ahead and introduce yourself to our lovely audience.
Hello, my name is Red MoonEagle, and I am a psychic catalyst. I'm a healer's healer, teacher, and I absolutely look forward to these podcasts every 2 weeks with Safrianna because it's this amazing ability to discuss and explore really real topics that matter to people that they're afraid to talk about. And it doesn't matter what we talk about, we always bring some forward in a replicable, and I am so excited to talk about this book.
Oh, thank you. And yes, I love these conversations as well, and that we can just show up authentically and have a discourse. And so just in case it's your first time encountering me, I'm Safrianna Luna, the Queer Spirit Guide. I'm an author. That's what we're going to talk about today. And I really am here to just help people shine their light and be themselves in the world. So, and I do that by leading by example, which is what we're talking about today. My most probably terrifying project to date, because it was so raw. I mean, you've read it. You were one of my beta readers, so you
Yep.
got an advanced copy of the book. It's actually been slightly reorganized since you last read it,
Mm-hmm.
assuming you haven't read the new copy. But uh, what I'm just curious for you as a reader, like, was it real? Was it authentic? Was it raw? What did it bring up for you?
You know, for me, it was this real authentic getting into the woods of the feelings of the journey. And that's the part that when I read memoirs or I read autobiographies, like anything that somebody talks about themselves, it's interesting. Okay, the facts are interesting, right? I want to see the growth. I want to see the body, mind, spirit, emotion. Like, I want to understand where the emotion came from your perspective. You show that. You show not only the mindful, like, journey of trying to make it all make sense, but then you also connect in spirit. You as an entity living in this meat suit experience and what the jack is going on. And that body aware, right? So like it's not just the emotional journey, but it's also what's happening to your physical body, and what does that feel different to your entity living in a meat suit, and why is it so painful? Ask the questions as you're writing, and you explore them all the way to the bottom in places. And to some people it probably just, poetry is poetry, but I loved how you really explored like and punctuation and dashes and moving things around to really give life
Mm-hmm.
to putting into words experience and the body, mind, spirit, emotional quality through all of them. I really loved how your voice came through, and the authentic wounding and pain and the journey for healing came through, and that's what I love.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So if you're just tuning in, I released A Woman's Work, my debut poetry book, officially, like, did the launch celebration kind of thing yesterday, per this recording. And it is, as I said at the beginning, probably the most vulnerable and raw thing I've ever, like, the most terror I've ever felt with putting a project out there, because, as Red just shared, like, I go all the way in, and I don't skirt around the trauma. I don't really get into everything that happened in my life. That would take volumes and volumes and volumes. But this particular book, it's told over 3 arcs. And that was super intentional because I love the butterfly phases. I love the caterpillar and the chrysalis and the butterfly. Like, that is my symbolism, my lifeblood symbolism. That's just through and through. And so I even included, which if you haven't seen this yet, Red, because the beta testers didn't get this, is that I actually have art in the book as well for each of
I
the
saw
3
that.
sections to transition. And
Mhm.
it's themed around the caterpillar, the chrysalis, and the butterfly. And so the
I actually
caterpillar.
really like that. This one was my favorite picture. That was
Mhm.
my favorite picture. I love that. I thought, oh my goodness, that's the perfect, not only the perfect analogy, visualization, but there's a felt sense in this piece of artwork that goes with the words. I could,
Mhm.
I felt that. And for me, that's pretty big to feel that
Yeah.
in someone, because if people don't go to the bottom of that well, I don't always pick up on the energy part because I don't have that empathy, right? So I'm not going to
Mhm.
feel your emotions, but I like to feel that there's an authentic connection. Even if I haven't experienced the thing, I can have a felt sense of what happened. And the
Right.
artwork for me brought that another layer in. So I really
Yeah.
enjoyed the artwork. Yeah.
I am so glad. Yeah. I was like, it's gonna be a surprise for my beta readers who don't know I'm putting it there until they get their copy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, like that was actually a suggestion from my beloved business bestie, Meryl Hayton. She was like, I just feel like you need to put art in your book. And I'm like, okay. And I like planted the seed and I let it percolate and then it was there. And I was like, oh, it's gonna be the butterfly phases. And it all came together. So arc 1, the caterpillar, really reflects things that I've written about before, where being the caterpillar is, we're little kids and we're just eating whatever's in front of us, whatever information and energy our parents are putting out, or our caregivers or our authority figures, we're just consuming it because that's what we need to survive. And the problem is that so many of us are consuming junk, right? Sometimes literally physically, and sometimes energetically, emotionally, spiritually, right? We can take in this junk from any of those angles. And for me, it was predominantly emotional trauma based, but the physical stuff wasn't good either. And the spiritual stuff was, I mean, I could have gone deeper in this book in the religious trauma. It just didn't feel like the perfect place to do it because I
Yeah.
wanted to focus on my story. But there are some spicy lines in this book that I know if certain people read, like, you're gonna come for me with, pitchforks because I'm bold and I don't believe in religious hierarchy anymore. So there's little seeds of that in there. But the second arc is the chrysalis and going into that dark night of the soul, and me realizing eventually towards the end that I was just playing out those childhood patterns that I'd eaten all over again. And so
Mhm.
to unmake myself from that, to be able to go into the butterfly journey is still not like the last arc is not sunshine and roses everywhere. It's still, oh, I live with these challenges and I live with self love at the same time.
You
And
know, I think
so
that's
that's
one of the one of the big messages from this book. The journey is difficult, right? Like telling people, this has been a pet peeve, right? Like talk about one of our previous conversations, the bullshit, right? Like don't tell people it's all sunshine and roses, that rainbows are going to shoot out their ass. Like that's not real life. Real life is full of the arcs of joy, sadness. And when you heal, yes, you get more glimmers, right? You get more glimmers of that emerging from the chrysalis. But think of butterflies' lives. They're very short.
yeah.
They are beautiful, but they travel so far. I mean, the monarch butterfly travels half of the globe every year, right? Like there's this journey, there's this hardship that comes from emerging as the butterfly. And
Mm,
you do carry those burdens, but they do get lighter as you work through them. And there's more capacity
yep.
to be fully who you are. And I think that's a pretty valuable message in this book, that you're real with it. You're really
Yeah.
real with it.
Thank you for acknowledging that. Like, cause that, that's so much of what spurred me to put this book out there, despite it being terrifying. And I've already said, like, I haven't said anything to my family about it because they don't need to know it exists. My sister did buy a copy and started reading it, and she just
Mhm.
sent me a big old oof. She's like, oof, and sent me a poem. She's like, oh, I feel this. She and I get so much of this book together. But
Yeah, that makes
yeah, my
sense.
my elder family, they don't need to hear about this because they would literally die of shame knowing that I'm
Yeah,
actually speaking the truth and unleashing these generational wounds and saying I don't need to
mhm,
carry them anymore. And that
right.
was when I finished writing this book, there was this huge like burden lifted where I was like, I can talk about anything I want now. And I also don't have to talk about a lot of these things anymore. Like the
Yeah.
book already did that for me. And yes, I'm sure when I'm older, I'll probably write like a memoir, and I'm sure there will be more poetry books in the future. And Daddy's Girl is still coming out probably this year, which that's comparatively to this book, I don't even know where to start. They are
Mm,
thematically similar, but where this book focuses on my childhood, my 20s, and then my 30s, really. Like that's kind
mhm.
of the
Yeah.
three arcs. Daddy's Girl just focuses on my relationship with my father and
Yep.
all kinds of angles of that. Whereas, I mean, he comes up in, I think, like one or two poems in a woman's work because it just wasn't about him, right? But a Daddy's
Right.
Girl very much is about him and the relationship that we had that was complex. But now I'm like, I can literally talk about anything now that I want because I have put quite possibly the most challenging piece I possibly could out there.
Well, it's the capacity thing, right? Like when you heal and you lift a heavy burden of speaking your voice, using your voice authentically, getting that emotional trauma up and out, right? Like
Mhm.
regurgitating all of that, getting it out, light on things that people are terrified to bring to the light of day. You
Yeah.
open up capacity. You create capacity to talk about other difficult things. And I'm
Mhm.
so excited about hearing about the book, this next one, because I'm a daddy's girl. I'm a papa's little girl. And there, God, I wouldn't even have a clue how to talk about that. I have
Yeah.
no clue. I have no idea where to start with that, because your story and my story are very different. But when you have that daddy's girl, I'm going to call it a complex because a little bit of it is.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
it has its own traumas, right? Like
Mm.
there can be a lot of love, but then there can be a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
And there's that duality that women carry. I mean, we can give forth birth to men or women, right? Like we have the duality within us.
Mhm.
And when you're a daddy's girl, there's a whole nother complexity as to what that does to the psyche and what you're absorbing, what you're chewing on
Yeah.
as that caterpillar when you're young. And yeah, like I have no clue where to start. Like I'm happy to discuss it, but I wouldn't have a clue where to start either. Like
Right.
I think I would probably have an easier time talking about the trauma between my mother and me in a dialogue than my dad and me, because I know where that pain started. You know, right? Like I
Right.
would know where it starts.
Yeah. And I love this piece about like the difference in trauma between like our caregivers, right? Maternal,
Yep.
paternal, etc. Because there is a dynamic there, as you were saying, that shows up in a woman's work in that I
Yep.
totally got my overworking from my dad because I
Yes.
looked to him as the example and he was for the longest time the breadwinner, right? And he literally, I mean, I got so many messages from him that you work till you die. And that's that. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what he did and why there's now a very sad poetry book about him because he worked himself to death. He literally worked himself until he had cancer and it was overwhelming and he succumbed to it unfortunately after some treatment. And I 100%, I mean he just turned 60. That's so young. Uh
There-
and And he was living it up in the last year though, because he was on disability, because he'd finally gotten to quit his job because he had cancer. And he was like, woo, I'm going to spend all my money and like go party and do whatever I want. And then didn't worry at all about taking care of himself. And he died, and then my sister and I were left having to process all of that, which is why Daddy's Girl was written in the first place, was me processing all of that. So yeah, it's fun because a woman's work, it's like women are still conditioned into masculine stuff, right? And I talk about it as the solar and the lunar flow, and the solar is very consistent. Sun rises and sets every day, and that's much more traditional men. A lot of men, not all men, but a lot of men thrive in consistency and getting up and having a 9 to 5 and going into their work and like being there and then coming home and relaxing in the evening. And lunar flow is much more variable and ebb and flow. And the moon grows light and dark, and women, again generalizing here, but not all women, actually would perform better in life if they were allowed to have that softer flow. And then of course some men lean more towards that lunar, and some women genuinely lean towards that solar, but we have to allow there to be room for people to self-express in that way. And that's so much of what I unpacked. Poems like Fulfillment Machine, Liberty for All, The Universe Does Not Hustle, those poems in the
Patriarchy.
book. Fuck the patriarchy, yeah. Those
Love
are
that.
really speaking to the fact that this system doesn't really serve women, and it really doesn't serve people at large
No,
at
it
all.
doesn't. There's no the quality of actually, The Universe Does Not Hustle was one that the first line actually reminded me of a poem that I wrote many, many years ago.
Mm.
And you say, racing toward an illusory finish line. And when I read that the first time in the beta, I was like, okay, I have to put this down for a hot minute and go do something. Like there was just this resonating moment of as though you or and I were on this string together, flicked. And I went, oh, that vibration went everywhere. And it was a real moment of I gotta put this down, I have to go do something else, and then I'll come back and I'll finish reading it. But I skipped it. I skipped the poem and then went on to other things. I actually made myself come back to that one last because of that threaded vibration of that phrase, racing toward an illusory finish line.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a dynamic about how men seem to crave, not all men, right? But they seem to crave that 9 to 5, like you were saying. And women are left holding all of the capacity for all of the things that don't fit in a straight line. We are
Yeah.
left holding everything that doesn't fit in a straight line. I'm not saying, again, this is a general statement, like you said, like this isn't putting everybody in the same bucket. But if you have a culture and a society that does that men, you're left with the rest of the fucking alphabet, then how the hell are you supposed to have room for yourself to grow and to change and to stretch and can't hold your own stuff, much less everybody else's stuff. And it
Right.
was that thread in that poem. And I'm looking at it right now, and I would really love for you to read that one if you could, because I want to hear
Yes.
you read. I know I hear your voice when I read it, but I would love you to read it.
Yeah, let me see if I can get to it here in my PDF copy. So this is in the third arc. So this is me waking up and realizing I can't keep doing things the way that I've been doing, that the caterpillar and the chrysalis did not work for me. Like the chrysalis got me out of some of it, but I still, I'm flying and I still need to dust off some of the stuff. So it's actually quite far in the book, but here it goes. So it's called The Universe Does Not Hustle. Racing toward an illusory finish line, a competitive level of misunderstanding. There is no ending, only a leading to new beginnings. There is no separateness between start and stop, only perspective, choice. Will I continue rushing ahead toward a concept that does not exist, save in our limited beliefs? Or will I stop and smell every rose that catches my eye along the path, trusting I am divinely led? This has been my cyclical error, never allowing myself the grace of a pause before running headlong toward another goalpost down the road. I know beyond these old measures, present, anchored, I can find bliss in each fresh day, pleasure in each sense, safety in my body, right here, no danger on my doorstep when I just be. Only I can will my legs to stop hurtling me forward. Only I can sit down, stay a while in the shelter of my heart and soul. So I will stay within this creative still span of experience, twine the tender moments around my fingers, drink in the sweet seconds where I find no need to do anything more than trust, play, be, allow the beauty to unfold around me with all the majesty of a reborn universe ever expanding.
So there's some words in this poem, how you've put them together. Not only that first line, but there's other lines. Like I've read it a couple times now, and hearing it, you read it, it's so funny. Like some of the emphasis is in different places when you read it versus the way, right? Like the way that I wrote my own poem that sounded a lot like this. And I wrote mine when I was like, I don't know, 11, 12 years old, like a long time ago.
Man.
And it was reading your poem and the depth of how hurtling forward, right? Like hurtling, illusory finish, the image of what other people expect you to hold. Again, that capacity thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways giving up to grace, but I don't mean it in this religious context. It's more of a giving yourself the space and the pause to be, and being as a whole experience is a big deal no matter who you are, no matter what natural
Yes.
number you are, no matter who you are. That's a big deal, because back to what our culture does, we're expected to hold all of the stuff of everything. All women are.
Yep.
And when you don't fit in that paradigm, and when you recognize it's broken, it takes a long time, even though time's not a thing, but it takes a long time to break the chains. Is a terrible term, and I don't mean it that way. I mean it more like get out of somebody else's box, right? Like,
Right.
and
Yeah.
breaking out the illusion that you're trapped.
And that's the biggest thing. Like I was talking to one of my partners the other day, and we were talking about limiting beliefs, and I said, "Do you recognize that this thing that you keep saying is literally just a belief that if you are able to reorient that,
Mm-hmm.
everything can shift because it's not actually true." And I kept
Right.
challenging the statement. I was like, "So you're saying I feel this way because you're having this limiting belief about how I perceive you. But I'm telling you that that's not the truth. Yet you're still asserting it's the truth." And they're like, "Uh-huh, yeah." I'm like, "Okay, so that's literally a belief. We have just proven that it's not actually true. I have told you it is not true because it's a belief that you have about me. So what are you going to do with that?" Right. And so many of us are just like, we're in this invisible box, and we're like putting the illusion of these walls up and going, "Oh, well, I can't leave because I'm in the box." And that
Yeah.
is why I wrote this book, was to break myself out of that illusory box that, yeah, I'm allowed to talk about these things. No one can stop me. And, it's not something that's very important to my writing is anyone who reads this, unless you literally know the exact circumstances of my life, you can't tell who these poems are about. Like, I mean, I mentioned my mother in one poem, so you can guess, oh, that's about her mother, or my dad, right? Okay, that was her dad. Oh, well, she mentions she has siblings. Oh, it's the siblings. Everyone else, you have no idea who I'm talking about, right? I probably have poems about 10 different people in here at least. Um, And so that's the thing. Once I got out of my own way, I'm like, well, I'm not putting anybody on blast. I'm not like poems, 17, 18 through 30 are all about this person. I'm not, I don't do that. So there's
Well,
nothing stopping me.
poetry is this amazing art of music. Music is poetry, right?
Mhm.
And oh, excuse me,
Hi,
Astra.
Astra.
Um, poetry is a form of creative expression, and if you look at the painting behind me, like it's Venus of Willendorf holding a human child, right?
Yes. It's
That,
evocative.
that it's quite evocative. But does anybody know who that child is?
I don't.
Unless I told
Got no clue.
them, they wouldn't know. Like, why did I pick Venus of Willendorf? Unless somebody asked me and I told them, they're not going to know. It's just this
Mhm.
evocative image, right? Poetry. And honestly, I think that's the beauty of poetry. Who was it? I think it was Shelley or Keats. I can't remember. It was one of those two. They wrote like hundreds of poems about their mother, but nobody knows that unless they know about the biography of those two poets. And it's this one liner in an autobiography thing that I read. And I've asked people for years, like, I had a teacher in an English college English class. I was, you do know that this is about his mother? And she went, no, it's not. And I went, yeah, it is. She said, how do you know? Well, this book over here told me that. And she went, oh, I haven't read that. Like you don't know until you know, and then you
Right.
can't unsee it. But in the meantime, you can infer, right? Like the
Mhm.
poem that I love, the universe does not hustle. I saw pieces of myself in that poem.
Mhm.
And also, I saw my own journey of at 12, 13 years old going, shit, this box is never going to fucking fit. I've got to figure out how to get out of this box that other people have put me in. And
Yep.
hell, it took decades to get there, but we got there.
Yeah. And that I want to touch on that really quick because the universe does not hustle, and you say time's not real, and it is all made up. It's our perception of linear time. And for me, I'm not always the best example of overcoming trauma because I did it very early, actually. And
You
that was
did.
part of my blueprint and why I came here so that I could be the example of the person that overcomes the trauma and then
And,
stand in the light.
and
And
post dark time, you had to be ready for the dark time.
yes, I've
I'm
had
going
my
to hold
heart
you to it.
I have had my heart ruptured open enough times already and put myself back together that I can help other people do that
Yep.
in the times ahead. Oh gosh, my poor one partner is panicking about the dark time right now, I think, and doesn't want to be here. We're talking about that. Oh gosh. But yes, a linear time, right? Our perception of I'm not doing it quickly enough or I'm not overcoming this thing soon enough, whatever. Like we all still have the opportunity to go through this arc, to go through this storyline of
Yes. Yep.
overcoming what we've been through, of going into the dark night of the soul and being like, what the fuck? Like, why did this happen to me? And like having all of those feelings because I have been there where I'm like, the second arc actually in this book is more painful for me to read than the first one because the first
Yeah.
one I'm like, I'm a kid. I don't
Right.
know anything that's going on. The second arc, I am 18 and older because it actually the first arc concludes when I'm 22 into 23. So arc 2 is 22 to 23 through 30, 31. And then the last arc is there forward, but reading that second arc and seeing how codependent I was and how depending on other people's validation and love and everything that I just needed to give to myself, like that was more painful for me. And I think that's where a lot of people are. They're looking for that outside validation that what they've been through is terrible and that someone is going to finally take care of them. And the answer is that you get to take care of yourself, you get to love yourself, and you get to be the mother or father or caretaker for your inner child to heal that, and then you can reclaim yourself fully. And you might be 75, you might be 90 when it happens, you might be 35, you might be 25. There's no, because the time is made up and we're all going through the pattern in a different way.
And I think the other thing with that too is that there's no formula. There's no formula to perfect. There's no perfect way of doing it. If you have an obsession with perfection, that you're not perfect or it's not perfect, you're going to struggle with this. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're going to have to come to a place of peace with your internal shadow dialogue, or you're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to keep going around and around and around and around.
Yep.
And the other part, like you, that outside validation of love. If your internal dialogue is, I'm not good enough to love,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm not loyal enough, or whatever those other kinds of internal dialogues are, you're going to struggle with seeking that constantly to fix you.
Yep.
Or hide because you don't want anybody to see.
Yeah.
Right? It's not. I think this is the thing that I think we've talked about a lot just in our podcast, where we talk about that terror, the monster under the bed, that fear that drives this inability to learn to love yourself for the wholeness of who you are. And
Mm-hmm.
this idea that perfection is like something, right? Like the right way to heal from trauma looks like this. I was actually I'm in a class. I'm taking a master class on loss, grief, death, and dying, which I'm giggling about because I'm having exercises and frustration all the time with the professor because she makes blanket statements that sound very much like her inner dialogue is, please don't look at that I'm not really doing my shit, right?
Right.
And she has these formulas. Like, it's a formula for her. And I'm always arguing in these discussions about there is no formula. Change is terrifying to people, grief and loss, and then you add just basic change, grief, and loss, right? Then you add trauma, narcissism, sociopathic, pathological things. Like, you add all the layers, and when you say you went through it early, yes, comparatively to somebody who maybe's been here for 60 years, the time's not a thing, because that person at 65 years old may have never had the opportunity or the support needed, even step a little bit past that comfort line to do the healing. And you have written a beautiful blueprint that says, yes, you did have to do the heavy, we all have to do the heavy lifting ourselves, right? But you've had support. And I was actually in my daily devotional today also talking about, I've been alone a lot of my life, and yet I've had this amazing fluctuation of these epics in my life where these wonderful people have come in and taught me all about this one. It was awful and painful and traumatic, but it was a lesson, and I chose to learn from it. And you've done the same thing, where you've allowed the movement and the journey to be the lesson, even in the discomfort. And you talk about that in this book so eloquently, and with creativity, this, I'm going to say the word, harmony.
Well, funny about that I feel like my keyword is peaceful harmony is like my mission. Here we are. Ike said, what? I can't just plan for concreteness forever. Love that change is the only inevitable thing. And that, as we've had this part of the conversation, I want to read one of the shortest poems from the book.
Oh, yeah.
Because it made my beta readers, I think, the most uncomfortable, because it was hanging intentionally. It's called The Slow Death.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'll read it twice, because most people read it twice. They literally told me, I read this twice because it was so short and like I needed time to process it. So the slow death of waiting for honesty, compassion, communication, tenderness, safety, trust, integrity, companionship, love. The slow death of waiting for honesty, compassion, communication, tenderness, safety, trust, integrity, companionship, love. We will die a slow death if we wait for all of those things outside of ourselves. And that was, the arc. This is the first arc when I'm in this state of like, it's got to come from somewhere, right? Like I need honesty, I need compassion, I need people to communicate with me, I need tenderness and safety and trust and integrity and companionship and love, and I'm not getting it anywhere outside of me because everything outside of me is just trauma, 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 and more trauma. And that's what it felt like, a slow death of waiting for these things to come. And so, doesn't come to the third arc. This began in the first arc. So I think so many people, that left them uncomfortable because they're like, where's the resolution? Well, that's the point. There was no
That's the point.
resolution when I was waiting for other people to bring that into my life. There just wasn't.
I think that's part of that internal journey that you show through the whole book of poems. You show that resolution is an ongoing exercise, right? Like resolution is not perfection. Resolution is the lesson. There's a lesson or two in every single poem. There's an awareness, but even with that awareness, you recognize, wait, there's more. Like we know death is inevitable in this fleshy body, but those of us that are aware that our higher consciousness or something else, right? It still continues.
Right.
But death can be very abrupt. I think that's one of the reasons that people struggle with like suicide, or they struggle with murder, or they struggle with a car accident that took somebody away abruptly. They struggle with the abruptness of change. Yeah. And long-standing trauma has these abrupt triggers, right? Like what happens when you get triggered, right? It reinvigorates, for lack of a better term, the abruptness of the trauma.
Yeah. Mm.
You do write about that.
I do. Yeah, the final line so each of the arcs has an introductory poem that ties into the caterpillar, the chrysalis, and the butterfly. And the last line of the chrysalis poem is each thread, so each thread of myself, broken down into its basic elements, reorganized with precision, but not perfection. Because there is just no such thing as perfection other than the existence of what is here on this earthly realm. It takes me back to Om Pranamida, a Sanskrit mantra. This is perfect, that is perfect, from the perfect springs the perfect, take the perfect from the perfect, and only the perfect remains. We are perfection.
We are.
But we're also not. That's the duality of us, right? The light and the shadow and 3D, 5D, 4D, and all of that. Like,
I think that I've said it this similarly. But one of the things that people ask me all the time, they're like, not everything has purpose, Red, right? And I'm like, wrong. Everything has purpose. Yeah, well, then how do you know? Yeah, they don't like to hear that. And then they go, but how do I know which way to go? I went, stop seeking perfection and it will be exactly the way it's supposed to be. And every time I say that, people give me the, I don't like that. That's uncomfortable.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, talk about perfection and perfectionism, like putting a book like this out in the world. I learned an important lesson uploading this book. So Amazon does a scan of your ebook. It does not do a scan of your print book. So when you upload an ebook, it actually scans for typos and it tells you if you have any typos that it can catch. And I had 2 misspellings of very hard to spell words to begin with, and spelling has never been my strong suit. That's a complex I have. I will own that. Thanks elementary school testing. Talk about creative wounds. But I literally, oh no, I just derailed myself. Yes, murmur and fiery were the 2 words I misspelled. And I had already uploaded the print book and it had already gone to print. And I was like, okay, so some people might get a book. There's a chance. They might get a book with murmur and fiery misspelled. I would have like roasted myself so hard back in the day for like not having that perfection. And now I'm like, cool. If they get that one, they've got the first edition. Oh no, Amazon actually uploaded my book earlier than I wanted them to. And so I didn't have any time to do those double checks. But now I know to upload the ebook first and then the print book. Lessons learned.
Right.
But that's it. Lessons learned. Right. And it's exactly how it needed to be. And none of my beta readers caught those spelling errors either. And we all of us caught like one typo here or there. So like it's a progress, not perfection kind of scenario to me.
You know, I have a friend of mine who's told me for years, she goes, Red, you're such a perfectionist. And I always question that because I'm like, you clearly don't know me 30 years and you keep calling me a perfectionist. And I don't know where the hell that comes from because I'm the least perfect. Not only can I not spell, because I learned to write and read in German and in English. I mean, I could read in English, but I couldn't write until I learned to write in German before I learned to write in English. And all the German rules are different.
Yeah.
And I found out in college that I have dyscalculia and I probably had dyslexia, but because I've learned to compensate, I test really well with that, but I still can't spell for shit, right? And I'm a teacher. Like I've been teaching for years. And one of the most hilarious things that one of my first principals told me was it would probably be a good idea if I let somebody help me write my tests for my classes because there are too many spelling and grammar errors. And I was like, actually, some of those are on purpose. Like I do them so to see if the kids will catch it and correct me. It became a game in every class I ever taught to catch the teacher in the mistake and put the correction. Yeah. Because that made them feel like they know something, right? It built self-esteem. Yeah. 2, it humbled the teacher, which I am completely okay being the humbled person. I have no attachment to that ego at all. And 3, it helped me with my disability.
Flexibility and adaptability. I love it, right? Precision and intention and how you approached it, right? And that's, oh my gosh, this perfectionistic society. I'll just say that we live in a perfectionist society that always wants the bottom line to go up and always wants to increase and always wants more and always wants perfection. And it doesn't serve any of us except for maybe on one level, the people at the top. But I always argue like that doesn't serve them either because stepping on the backs of others does not make us happy, like on a soul level. We might feel satisfied in like a sadistic kind of way that we got out on top and someone else is underneath us, but that does not help our soul. That does not help our evolution. It doesn't help us actually achieve true joy and happiness. It's just power and control.
There was a workshop I went to many years ago as a manager, and they were using these graphics, where the manager's at the top and always a he, is reaching down and lifting people up, right? And they're saying, this is what good managerial is. You're lifting people up. You're lifting people up to your level. And I couldn't help myself. It's in the first couple hours of the workshop. I'm bored out of my gourd, and this guy is so full of himself, it's not even funny. And I raised my hand and I said, give us your question, young lady. I love that, right? And I said, I would like to know where the assumption comes from that people are beneath you. The entire room went dead silent. It was apparently very uncomfortable for many people in the room because he had nothing to say. Like he was quiet for like a couple heartbeats. He didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
And then some platitudes, promptly ignored me for the rest of the weekend and never answered the damn question because I'm neurodivergent and I would like my question to be answered.
Right.
Because if the assumption is correct that everybody's beneath you, if you're a manager, how do we fix that? Because that doesn't seem equitable to me. Like that's where my thoughts went to, but I was never even given the opportunity to explain that. And I was told by my boss to just be quiet for the rest of the workshop. My questions were too difficult.
Oh, I love that. I speak to that in one of my poems in this book, that
Yeah,
like I was
you.
the child that asked the difficult questions because I
Yeah.
never understood power dynamics. I never understood the, because I said so mentality, or I just know better because I'm older or wiser or in a position of power over.
Authority.
Yeah. Yeah, and, no, screw that. That's the anthem of this book really is, uh, self-reclamation. And I loved that, I had multiple assigned male at birth beta readers, with varying queer or not queer identities. And even they all had some questions that came up in themselves as they were reading, like, hmm, this makes me uncomfortable. Why? And, those are the people I want to be surrounded by, are the people that when they get uncomfortable, they're like, well, why? What's going on here? And they let themselves keep going. Like, the universe does not hustle, and that chord of that first line made you uncomfortable. So you stepped back to allow yourself to feel it, process it, and then come back. And that is not what that teacher in that workshop did, right? They were just like, "Oh, I'm uncomfortable and I'm just going to bypass it and ignore and pretend it didn't happen." And that is what we need to stop doing. We need to stop pretending that trauma doesn't exist. We need to stop pretending that generational wounds don't exist. We need to
And the
stop pretending that,
platitude.
yeah. And
Mm.
yes, like we want authenticity, we want integrity, we want connection, we want engagement. Like, we know our human gifts, and that's I do have a fun little nod to the natural numbers, in the book, with a poem called "I Dream of a World where I highlight the gifts of humanity, and that all of us possess one important piece of the puzzle, and we can embrace all of the others. And that's the world I want to live in, is where we're all like, it doesn't bypass discomfort, right? It just gives us tools to communicate about them instead of speaking platitudes or ignoring, or, oh, well, that's just how it is. That's the way it's always been. Like, no,
Or I think there's another layer of that too, though. Like equitable exchanges without platitudes mean you can tell somebody something and really come from a place of love, and it can still be a difficult thing to hear. It's immediately going to, well, I'm afraid that if I say that, you're going to punish me. So I'm going to say something that hopefully won't trigger you because I'm more worried about what you're feeling instead of holding the integrity and the equitability of the moment. And we all do it. I am
yes,
100% with that. 100%. I think we all are, because that fear of retribution comes from the trauma of being a child in a world where you don't understand what's going on. You do
mhm.
ask difficult questions. The things humans do don't make any fucking sense to me sometimes. Um,
Same,
like all of these pieces, whether your paradigm is shame, fear, or disappointment, doesn't matter.
right.
Being punished, being who you are. We all
Yes,
have it. And no matter how much we heal, we will find ourselves in those spaces where it doesn't feel safe to say the things that need to be said and do the things that need to be done with equity, with integrity, with authenticity, with honesty, with a lack of fear.
right.
And I I think for me, this poetry book is another layer of demonstrating, right? A good teacher. I'm going back to Khalil Gibran because I love him. He says you cannot teach somebody of your own knowingness, but you can show them to the doors of their own awareness, right? And
Mhm.
that's what good teachers do. A teacher doesn't teach you all the things they know. I mean, they might share stuff, but they give you tools to explore in a safe place. And to be the best teacher you can be, you become the student of the person that you are helping, because you're not
Mhm.
doing it for them. You're going to fucking make a mistake. They're going to rile back at you and go, for example, on the teaching question, I had a student for 4 years, bless her, misspelling, every mispunctuation, every single thing that wasn't formatted right. I put an extra space in a sentence, God forbid. she would come back up to my desk, and I laugh about it now, but the first year I had her in class, I knew why I made the mistakes in the tests, right? Like, but she really took it as a personal affront that I wasn't smart enough as a teacher to be perfect. And
Mm,
her
mm,
approach was very confrontational and very wounded and very traumatic. She had an awful upbringing, and there were abandonment issues, and there was a lot of stuff, and she wanted to respect me as she kept saying, I just can't respect you, Miss A. I just can't respect you. And for a while I was really hurt by that. And then I
yeah,
realized, wait a minute, this is your opportunity, Red. Right? Like I told myself that this is my opportunity to learn from her. What is she really trying to teach me?
yeah,
She was teaching me how to be humble. And she was really teaching me to be a good teacher. I don't know everything. And she was teaching me, and I've always been pretty much one who says, I fucked that up. I'm the first one in elementary school that says, I broke that thing. Like, and everybody's like, oh my God, don't admit to shit. Why? I did.
Why are you tattling on yourself?
Right? And this teacher experience, this one student, I will forever be very grateful. I actually told her that when she graduated. I told her, I was like, you taught me so much. And she was like, we didn't even get along, Miss A. For 4 years, we didn't get along. And I went, well, that might be your perspective. But my perspective was extreme gratitude
Mm-hmm.
and that humble awareness that I became a better teacher for somebody that was deeply disappointed in me.
Right.
And recognizing what she could teach me and how better, right? How I could learn to communicate with her. I'm autistic. I don't communicate. I over communicate, which is not necessarily better. And I like how in your book you show by the experience, right? Like you're teaching through the experience and also gaining the lesson of what those experiences brought to you. And
Mm-hmm.
nobody needs to know the whole background of the thing that happened. Nobody needs to
Right.
know that, because the beauty of this artistic form of poetry still gives people the lesson, that discomfort, right? That short poem of anticipation, resolution. You lean into it and you go, yeah, well, I learned this. Here. Enjoy it on your own.
Yes, and Ike and I are planning to do a little podcast series at some point where I read the poems and we break them down more. I don't know exactly how we'll format it yet, but Ike said in the comments, they're like, try to read that poem again, but pause for longer than 5 seconds. Let us stew in the discomfort for a bit. I said, we'll do that in the
Ooh,
podcast. We'll stew in all
yeah.
the discomfort in the podcast. It's going to be an experiment in that.
Oh, yes. I love that idea. That's beautiful. Discomfort isn't scary. It just is.
Yeah, we it's like working a muscle, right? Like
Yeah.
this is why I love the going to the gym analogy, because we can all picture, oh, I haven't gone to the gym in a while, so I can't really lift the 25-pound weight again. Whereas I could lift a 75-pound weight when I was hitting the gym every day. Like discomfort, if we don't stretch that
Push it
muscle at
off.
all, we push it
Yeah.
off, we lose our tolerance, and or we never had the tolerance in the first place. So our window of tolerance, this is something I will probably teach a master class on it in the future, but our window of tolerance can get bigger or it can shrink, and sometimes it's practically shut. And when we've experienced a lot of trauma, the window is either shut or like it's literally like this, where anything triggers us up out of the window
Yeah.
or down out of the window. And this book is kind of a testament to that, because
Mhm.
I had no tolerance for discomfort in that second arc, which was why I was so codependent and like looking for that outside validation in every relationship with every single person. And now I can really sit with discomfort. Had a rough day yesterday despite the book launch. And
Mhm.
there was just a lot going on and a lot of stuff coming in that was less pleasant for me to deal with. It was very uncomfortable. And I was able to hold that completely and still celebrate my book launch and be like, wow, and then see my book hit #1 LGBTQ poetry new release. And I'm like, so like I was holding both the discomfort and the comfort. And that is something that we get to do when we expand that window of tolerance, because we're still sitting here in the middle, uncomfortable and comfortable, but it's not knocking us into fight, flight, freeze, or depression, anxiety.
Right.
And so that's ultimately like, I hope if people read this book, well, I know people have already read it, and I have had
Mhm.
so much good feedback. I got a sweet message from our beloved mutual natural number 8 the other day, just being like,
Ah,
thank you for your honesty and your love and all of this. And so I see it already having an impact, but that's my hope, is that the impact of this book is people see my story, because it's memoir and poetry,
yeah,
and
it
they
is.
also see themselves in it, that somewhere in some of the poems, everybody has had a poem that they're like, this is me in a poem, like, huh, this is interesting. And so I want them to have that impact ultimately of, okay, well, she got to reclaim herself, so why can't I? If they're there, or if they're already in that self-reclamation, that they're just like, yeah, like cheering on, and then maybe they give the poetry book to someone else who needs to hear it. But we can survive absolutely awful, terrible, should have never happened things, and still learn to love ourselves after it. So that's my ultimate hope for the book, is that people get that message.
Yeah. I mean, for for me, it was just this amazing. I just loved it. I love real, authentic stories that are taught with, and that are teaching opportunities, and that goes back to one of my life themes. I'm like the forever teacher. Everything's a learning opportunity. Everything has purpose. Everything has meaning. Might not even be for me. And the one poem that really struck me was because it resonated with something that I had written, and it's really
Mhm.
one of the, I would say, the first time I've ever seen someone else's work reflect a very specific time in my own life that I too wrote a poem about. So it was like this wah 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 weird moment, right? It was more uncomfortable to have that wah 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 moment, but the poems were, and are, they are these beautiful things. I have like 3 people that I'm planning on getting paper copies for and sending them, because I talk about it with clients all the time. Like there's always every client brings me a new lesson, right? And sometimes
Mhm.
they're thematic. Like the last 3 weeks have been mind-bogglingly, universe, here's your nugget, and you're doing exactly what you need to do, Red. So keep doing it, and here's your nugget, and here's your nugget, and here's your nugget, or your cookie, or whatever. And yesterday I had an amazing conversation with a natural number 1, and part of that was very much a lot of the themes in this book of that transformation and that letting go of other people's, and that perfectionism thing. Like, whoa.
Mhm.
And I haven't really had an opportunity to go pretty deep in a blueprint with a natural number 1 before. Not really, really deep. Most of the natural number 1s that I've had blueprints with, they're kind of at kind of third chapter of your book, right? Like they're in that other part. So you don't really go to the bottom of the well, because capacity is stretched. Their ability to handle things is better. So they take what you give them and they're like, oh, click, that fits. Onward we go. But this is a natural number 1 that was in the first part of your book, still in the
Yeah,
caterpillar stage. And getting to that place of being aware that there is a chrysalis waiting, right?
right.
And this is the having had your kind of in the back of my head, I was like, I really need to get this client this book. Right? Like, when you're like, this is a lesson book. I need to put it on my list of books, that this is a outside resource from me just talking at you, right? This is an outside resource that gives it from a perspective you can hear it, that it's not me.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think that's what this poetry book is for a lot of people.
Thank you. And, I think of Andrea Gibson and so many of the other poets that I have read their work, that, I mean, one of the poetry books, I remember reading Ike and I, that was when we first started dating, we'd go to the bookstore. There's a poem in this book. Full disclosure, the poem Our Ritual is about Ike Luna.
I,
Surprise.
I,
It's pretty
I
obvious if you know
recognize
us.
him.
But we literally would go to poetry, like, or to bookstores, and we'd find the poetry section, and we'd do all of those things in that poem. And we would just cry because we would find ourselves in the words of others. And there were so many moments reading. I want to make sure I don't get her name wrong. I think it's Michelle Foley, poet. But Andrea Gibson, yeah, Megan Falley. There we go. See, I knew I was going to get it wrong. And she's an LGBTQ spoken word poet, and she worked with Andrea Gibson, they them, to do some collaborative poetry books too. And both of their work is just, I mean, instrumental in how I saw poetry, even though I'd already been writing poetry like my whole life. And so that I want to be that for someone else, where they're sitting on a park bench and they're reading this and they're like, oh, I see myself in this, and maybe I can release this pain because I know I'm not alone in it anymore. Because sometimes that universality is one of the most healing bombs we can receive, is just to know that we're not alone in a particular set of experiences or feelings or traumas, right? And so, like, big shout out to Megan Falley and Andrea Gibson for their impact on me, and I want to have that impact on other people. That's my dream. One of my other beta readers responded in one of my posts marketing the book and said, what is your measure of success for this? Is it sales? Is it, what is it? And I said, it is the impact. And I've already achieved that because I've already received numerous messages of people being moved by a particular poem, or the whole book, or, a section. And so it's already been successful. Yay, I did my job. And now it's to continue getting it out in the world, because I do believe this could change the way some people see things. So
I think it's pretty powerful. We're all influenced by different things. The poet that influenced me the most is Khalil Gibran. Most people don't realize that, and I read a lot of poetry. I actually recognized the name Andrea Gibson. I was like, okay, like I read poetry because there's
mm-hmm.
when it's authentic. Poetry that's not authentic, I like go to sleep reading it. Like I can literally like fall asleep in the middle of a poem. It's fascinating. I never do that with anything else, just poetry. And the impact is always going to be more when you're speaking from a place of authentic self-healing, self-love, self-truth, and not from that place of I'm hiding who I am from you through poetry. Like you have to be in a place of healing, at least authentic words of self, right? At least to give that impact, or it's not art and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah,
and
it's performative.
I had no fear that you weren't going to be impactful. Like to me, that's a no-brainer. But that's
well, thank you. And it's fun. I'll spring to Daddy's Girl. I worked with a poetry editor on that one about, gosh, it's been like 2 years now, and the book is still sitting there. Because one of the things that she had given me as feedback was, I don't see enough of your humanness in this. It's so focused on your father. Like, I want to see more of you. And now I'm like, oh, I'm so ready to go back into that one and add a few things or change a few things, because now I've shown my humanness very much so. Like, there is nothing messier than the second arc of me just being like, please love me. I just need you to love me. Like, that is rough. And that is as human as I can get, is owning, like, I was in that desperate state of just needing validation from people outside of me. And so now I'm like, oh yeah, I can go back and really make that poetry book have, I'm sure, a few more poems on how that relationship impacted me in other ways, instead of more of a top-down view of different things. So I'm excited to rework that one. If all goes according to plan, that one will be out in October. So
Perfect time for it.
say again?
Perfect time for it. Samhain season.
Yes.
Honor your
Ooh, yes.
ancestors.
Talk about, yes, ancestors, death, rebirth, darkness. Oh man, it's perfect. It's perfect. It's also his birthday.
Perfect.
So I have to be cheeky like that and, publish things on significant dates and whatnot. And this one,
I love
this one came out when it came out because my pendulum told me so. It was like, release the book with the full moon in May. I'm like, got it, cool, doing it. And I do feel like it was perfect timing. So thank you so much, Red, for being willing to talk about this today. And
Beautiful.
again, as always, for all of you out there, if you are listening and you want to hear Red and I talk about something, let us know because we are here for those ideas. And I am
And the
taking a
tricky
little.
subjects. Bring up the tricky subjects. Bring up those things that you're terrified and you're not sure if that's a safe topic. Way to the bottom of that.
Yes. Oh my God. Let's do it. Yes, people.
Yeah.
Challenge. Give us the trickiest topic you can and we'll see where it goes. And
Mm.
Red and I don't always agree. And that's part of the fun thing is that we sometimes
Yeah.
disagree and we can still keep having conversations. And that is the beauty of self-awareness and self-love and also compassion for ourselves and others. So again, thank you so much. We will be back probably in 2 weeks, unless I run away into the woods. I have a little getaway coming up, so that might be impacted. It might be slightly different than the 2 week that you're used to, but we'll be back.
We'll make it happen.
All right. Goodbye.